Hi there. I'd like to tell you about the biggest tragedy in sales tax. Now, hopefully, you'll be able to avoid this situation. You remember that old FRAM oil filter commercial featuring that grizzled tow truck driver? He was shown picking up a car whose engine prematurely kicked the bucket. And he says if only this car owner had changed their oil more often, they could have avoided this expensive engine replacement. You might even remember how he said it. You can pay me now or pay me later. Well, I think there's some truth to that, though I might say it a bit differently for sales tax. Let me explain. Here's a situation we find a lot of companies in. If this sounds anything like you are in danger of suffering the sales tax tragedy. Okay, you operate in a state and have nexus there. Since you have nexus, the state can force you to be their tax collector. However, you aren't registered in that state. You aren't licensed to collect sales tax, therefore you aren't collecting sales tax. Somehow the state becomes aware of you, either because they audited your customers or a competitor turns you in, or perhaps they spotted you on the freeway, or a disgruntled employee turns you in. In any case, once they find you, they'll send you a nexus questionnaire or just initiate an audit on you. In the course of the audit, the state determines that the activities you conduct in their state do in fact give you nexus, and you should have been collecting sales tax in their state. Looking at what you sell, they also determine that at least some of what you sell is taxable. With audits routinely looking back 6 or 7 years, your deficiency is likely staggering. Now, at this point, you might try to go back to your customers and collect past tax, but many of them might be out of business or have been acquired by other companies. You might be reluctant to ask clients for those taxes because they are some of your best customers, or they might just refuse to pay. At this point, this many years later, you aren't able to collect any of the money from your customers, and you're stuck. Not being able to get that money from your customers, you end up paying it all out of your own pocket. Now, just to add insult to injury, you also incur penalty and interest, which can add up to 50 to 60% of the underlying tax. Now, that's tragic. So that's the biggest tragedy in sales tax. It happens in a situation where you have nexus, you were selling something taxable, you weren't registered, and so you failed to collect the tax at the time of the transaction. When the state comes calling 4 or 5 years later, instead of just collecting the tax from your customers and turning it over to the state, you end up paying it out of your own pocket, plus the penalty and interest. Unfortunately, in the 20 years we've been doing this, we've seen this happen very, very often. This is not a rare situation. And it seems to us in the last couple of years that it's happening even more frequently, as states that are becoming very aggressive look extra close at resale certificates and are denying those certificates for the most technical of reasons. So this is something you want to avoid. So can this tragedy be prevented? Well, hopefully the answer is obvious. Yes. You will need to analyze where you have nexus and whether what you sell is taxable where you have nexus, and determine whether you should get registered. If you get registered, then you collect the tax and send it in. So returning to that old FRAM commercial, the way I would say it is slightly different, but it conveys the same meaning. If you might have nexus in a state, and what you sell is taxable, then I think it pays to be conservative. Sales tax is different from income tax. In the income tax scenario, I think it pays to be aggressive, because either you owe income tax now, or you owe it later. It still comes out of your pocket. Income tax is all you. Sales tax is different because if you should have collected it, you can get it from your customers. And they willingly pay it. Maybe not happily, but willingly. If you try and go back 5 years later, you might have some difficulty. So I guess the lesson that should be learned is if you think you have nexus and you sell something taxable, you'd be much better off collecting it now, so you can avoid paying it later. And so that's the lesson of the biggest tragedy in sales tax. I hope it helps.